Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Virginia SBDC's webinar series, Google and Beyond, Marketing and Managing on the Web. This series is designed to take a look at tools and techniques to help small businesses take their business to the next level. Today's webinar is Project Management on the Web. All of our Google and Beyond webinars are presented by Ray Sidney Smith, web and mobile strategist, author of Slow Mo Success, Social Media, Local, and Web Small Business Marketing Strategy Explained, and president of W3 Consulting. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type those questions into the question window, and Ray will do his best to answer them. Without further ado, here's Ray Sidney Smith.
Thank you, Tracy, and thank you to the Virginia SBDC Network for having me here on the Beyond Google Marketing and Managing on the Web series. As Tracy said, today we're going to be talking about project management on the web. And just a couple of housekeeping notes, as Tracy talked about, I'm here to answer questions. So while I'm going to talk about a lot of things today, feel free to go ahead and ask questions as you need them in the question panel, and Tracy will just cut me off and pop in and ask the questions, and I'll be happy to do that. As after the webinar, feel free to go ahead and ping us at W3 Consulting, hashtag it Beyond Google. I'll happily answer questions after the webinar via Twitter, and then of course you can go ahead and follow at Virginia SBDC in order to be able to follow along and learn about upcoming webinars and other information that the SBDC network has to offer you guys. So let's get started with our agenda for today. We're going to be talking about project management and how we do that on the web as small business owners. And so I just want to make sure that we're sort of on the same page with things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about project management. I'm going to give a little overview of project management, and really the twist that is, this is not really true project management in small business, because we have to sort of make a couple of refinements, or maybe if you're a project manager listening to this, probably devolutions from what true project management is. But it has to work for us as small business. We're going to talk about the project management tools. I'm actually going to do a survey of the various tools that exist out there on the web, and we're going to walk through them so that you can sort of see what they look like, just at least in the general sense. I'm not going to dive deep into any specific tool, but I will go into some of the tools so you can sort of see what they look like. We're going to talk about then some tips for getting the most out of project management as a small business owner, and hopefully that will help you moving forward and sort of getting started and making sure that you don't hit the sort of big pitfalls that I see a lot of small business owners really taking when it comes to things. So first and foremost, I just want to give this overview of project management so that we're sort of all on the same page as it relates to things. It's really interesting. I just recently finished reading a book called The Project Manager's Pocket Guide, Survival Guide by Dr. James P. Lewis. And in it he talks about a study or a report that the Standish Group put out in 1996, and it talks about this like ridiculous amount of money. I think it's something about $128 billion were wasted in projects that were information systems-based projects because of basically poor project management. And that means they either went out of they didn't perform properly. The cost, the time was was off, or the budget was off. Something was definitely out of scope when it came to those projects. And it's really important for us to understand first those primary sort of problems that happen with projects and how we can go ahead and handle them. Now that starts us off with a fundamental problem, which is, what is project management? So let's start off with what project management is and how does it translate for small business, and then some best practices. Well, Wikipedia defines project management pretty well for me, and so I rarely usually use Wikipedia as the ultimate resource for anything, but they give us a really great definition here, and I think we should stick with it for purposes of what we're talking about. And they call it the process and activity of planning, organizing, motivating, and controlling resources, procedures, and protocols to achieve specific goals in scientific or daily problems. So translating that for small business, what we're really talking about is that a project is something that is a defined, that means it has a beginning and an ending goal, and you know what the outcome is supposed to look like. Okay, so let's take a little bit of a Stephen Covey perspective here. You should be able to visualize, you should see the end result in some kind of tangible format. If it doesn't have that, it's likely not a project. And if it's not a project, then it fits into sort of a couple of different areas of your business. So when it comes to project management, really think of a series of projects as a program. Okay, so a program is something that you have across the board managing many different projects. You might call it a division or a department or something like that, but the reality is that a project really has to be time bound. Okay, so it means it needs to have a start and end. If it doesn't have a start and end, then most likely you're not going to be able to understand the basic parameters of any given project, which are performance, cost, time, and scope. Okay, so performance can be considered, can also be called quality. Okay, so we usually talk about PCTS in the project management world, at least in my world. And so just understand that we're really always trying to understand what the nature of the project is and understanding those four components behind it. Okay, so we really need to understand that this is the process and activity of planning, organizing, motivating, and controlling resources, procedures, and protocols. Okay, so we've got to sort of unwrap or take apart all of these pieces, but really it gets very, very complicated if we try to deal with all of that as small business owners all at once in sort of that perspective. So what I'd like to do is just talk about how we can sort of simplify this process just a little bit for us so that we can understand both how it operates in a theoretical perspective, but then how it's actually applied in your small business on a day-to-day basis. So let's just talk about some of the things that you really need to understand about project managers. First, you don't need to be a professional project manager to use the strategies and tactics of project management. So yes, project managers go to the Project Management Institute. They get certified as PMPs, project management professionals, or certified project management professionals. They go through continuing education practices, and they have very, very specific requisites and ethics as it relates to the industry and profession that's developed out of project management. But really, you have a small business and you just need to run it well. So I don't expect you to go out there and become a professional project manager. But what I do expect you to do is to sort of understand this on a much more granular level, as granular as necessary, so that you can effectively manage both the projects for your clients but also the projects for your business more effectively and efficiently. So that means understanding the concept of, when you're managing and when you're doing. Okay? One of the big things that I find that business owners do is that they forget that when you have a management hat on, you should be managing something. If you're not managing something, then you're not a manager. And I know that's really difficult to sort of parse sometimes because you're sort of in the thick of things. You're trying to make the business of business happen. But really, you have to have sort of two perspectives when you walk in the front door of your office or front door of your shop every day, which is, am I managing today, or am I managing right now, or am I doing right now? So you sort of have to go between the two roles, basically being your own boss at times, and then of course being the boss. So when you're in the role of manager, you then have to look at the projects from a hierarchical perspective. And then you have to sort of take that hat off and look at it from what would be sort of an employee perspective, basically a direct report perspective, when you're actually in the thick of things doing. Now, in traditional project management, one would presume that the project manager isn't actually doing any of those things because they're in a larger organization where they would be basically telling people what to do to get to where the project needs to get to. Okay, so the end goal, take for example, we want to implement a new piece of software in the company. Well, in project management, sort of day-to-day project management, a professional project manager would go ahead and talk to the senior executives, and they would of course come together with a scope agreement so that they would know what the goal and the outcome of the project is. They would then be able to sit down and work out what the time requirements are going to be, what the project looks like, who's going to be doing what, and what kind of budget is available, and when do they need to get this accomplished by. Okay? At the point in which they do that, it is a project. And at that point, then, the project manager's job is to go reach out to the various divisions within the company or the various departments within the company and let those teams know what needs to be done to be able to make that happen. Well, remember that a project manager is not really in charge of any particular person. They're in charge of the project and getting it to completion. So they're always borrowing, in essence, time, or borrowing the labor resources or other resources from the departments in order to make this project happen. Now, it's understood by the entire organization, but project managers always have to have that sort of healthy balance between the fact that they don't actually manage anyone specifically. They don't have their direct reports are not really usually theirs directly, to them, unless they happen to be in a smaller organization. But let's stay with the perspective that they're a larger organization and that they literally just hold a project management role. Then they have a little bit of difficulty being able to control both the fact that they can't tell someone who's not performing directly. They have to sort of go to their manager, that person's supervisor, to be able to make something happen. I actually just recently read in the same book that I mentioned earlier, it was funny that the author basically said project managers are basically professional tattletales because they have to go to the supervisors of these people and do all of that. And so the project manager is then working with these outside resources to make things happen. They're managing resources, not necessarily people. Well, translate that to your small business, and it comes down to the fact that you have to actually manage yourself and the staff that you have around you, depending upon how big you are or how small you are. If you're by yourself, well, that's when you have to sort of juggle the hats perspective, where you have to really think about, what am I doing now? When am I managing versus when am I doing? If you have a small staff or a medium-sized staff, then you have to start thinking about how you're project managing, or if you do appoint someone outside yourself as a project manager, how and what their roles and responsibilities are as it relates to being able to ask someone who's not doing what they're supposed to be doing to do it, and not just following up with them, but then what does the structure look like for human resources purposes and those kinds of things, which can be very tenuous. So you want to make sure you understand all of those really, translated issues for it. So I really recommend you just sort of step a little bit down from the theoretical when it comes to project management and really think about the practical aspects of, what does the project look like? What is the goal and the outcome? What is it going to cost? When does it need to be completed? And really, what are the parameters from all parties? Mostly in your business, you're going to have two different kinds of stakeholders. You're going to have yourself, your business, and what you want to accomplish. Those are one kind of project, the marketing and operations projects. Second, you're going to have client projects. And a lot of businesses treat them differently, and I'll talk about that later. But the point is that you want to be able to look at these projects and say, what does ultimate quality look like? What are our standards of quality and performance here? What are the costs? What's our budget? Where are we in terms of things? How much time do we have to get this accomplished? And what's the scope? Many times you don't know all of these things. You most often than not know a couple of these things. And really the goal, of course, is to find out as much of them as possible, and at least 3 of them in some kind of structure. Okay. The reason why we talk about the 3 out of 4 perspective is that with sort of like any project, any algorithm or anything else like that, you can basically guess what the 4th one is, or at least work with the 4th one if you know what the other sides are. So if you think about it as sort of being square, you can think about the square as being, each side being one of these factors: performance, cost, time, and scope. And if you know 3 of them, you can guess maybe what the 4th is, so that you can do it from that perspective. But not to get too theoretical. Anyway, so Next, I want to talk about some of the best practices when it comes to these things. And I know I'm repeating myself, but it really is important for me too here, because most often than not, these are the critical things that I talked about at the beginning that waste $120 billion in a single year in just one industry. Okay? So if you want to save money in your business, you want to work more efficiently, and you want to be more effective about finishing your projects on time, on budget, and to quality that your stakeholders want, you really need to make sure that you know the goal, the outcome, and share this goal and outcome with everyone. Okay? So what's the difference between the goal and the outcome in a project? The goal of the project might be to, let's say we're installing that piece of software. It may be to increase revenues or to create more touch points with our potential current and past customers through a CRM system, a customer relationship management system, which we talked about in a previous webinar here on the Virginia SBDC Network's webinar series. So you can go ahead and check that out on the archives. So we decide that we're going to go ahead and install the CRM tool so that we can keep in contact with our potential current and past customers. Well, that's the goal, okay? The outcome, though, is a new piece of software installed and being used by our staff members. So that's the difference. We can see people using a new piece of software. The goal is an intangible in essence. It's something that might resolve itself by seeing numbers, but at that point, the outcome then is to see an increase in sales. The goal, of course, is to make sure that we are, the goal is for us to be able to go out there and make sure we are having many more touch points with our customers, both past and present. All right, so once you know the goals, you really have to share them with your team, and this is as much for internal as external projects. So if you have a client that you're working on a project for, as much as you are working for an internal project, one that's marketing and operations, you really need to share those goals with everyone and share the outcomes. So many times I see a business owner come to us for consulting, and they haven't actually consulted with the rest of the company with regard to what they're actually doing, what their outcomes are, and what their goals are. So what it means is that they likely don't have buy-in from the group. Yes, you are the boss, and you're the employer, and therefore you hold control over the situation. But if the people in your business are not aware, or you don't trust them, or whatever it might be, there's a greater problem here that needs to be solved. Project management, that is pushing square pegs into round holes, is not going to fix some of these fundamental problems with human resources and other things. So you really have to remember that. Project management itself is not the only solution to many of the problems that don't allow things to get done. So really, you need to be able to share what those goals and outcomes are effectively with the people around you, and that way you get buy-in, and finally, by bringing more people to the table, and I don't mean having too many cooks in the kitchen, it's not about having everybody there, but effectively communicating those things appropriate to your size of business and to the culture of your organization, is making sure that if something is really out of bounds, perhaps you didn't catch something, they're going to be able to do that. They're going to be able to say, hey, Ray, I think you missed this big gaping hole in the plan, like, we don't have the electricity to support the new software that you want to run because the server that you want to install to run it takes up too much power. And it's like, oh, smack your forehead, and now you can resolve that issue by having an electrician come in and solving that problem. So you really don't want to limit your resources by not sharing your goals and outcomes with people. Next up is to plan fully. This is really difficult because it makes you think that you have to spend a lot of time planning, and that's just not true. There are several methods out there in the world that allow you to be able to plan a project fully. One of those is the Getting Things Done methodology, has what's called the natural planning model, and I would really check it out. If you just Google it, there's actually QuickBooks, Intuit's QuickBase. QuickBase is their project management tool. But if you go to the Intuit QuickBase website, which is quickbase.intuit.com, they actually have a wonderful webinar that's been delivered by the CEO of David Allen Company, which is the company that that was founded by David Allen, who wrote the book Getting Things Done. But in it, it's called the Natural Planning Model Webinar, I think, or something like that. But it goes over a method for being able to plan out a project. And planning out a project on not a huge scale, but planning a project that a small business would have to effectively deal with. And I think it's a really great method for being able to do it. There are lots of different ways in which you can plan, but I really recommend checking out that webinar because it's a really helpful way. He actually walks you through a project that you might want to accomplish and helps you plan it out. And so it helps you develop all of the pieces that are necessary for being able to structure a project for yourself. So the next thing that I would recommend, really from a best practices perspective, is to plan especially for what I call noise, negatives, non-knowables, and non-responders. Okay? So first of all, noise. What is noise? Noise is sort of the static. You know, when the television gets turned on and you get a little bit of static, you know, before you connect the right HDMI cable or the right coaxial cable. Well, that's the sort of gap between watching your favorite show and the time between watching the favorite show. There's always going to be lag time between different phases of a project. So a phase of a project might be we have to get all of the electrical equipment, foundation put into the office before we can install the servers. Okay? Well, that means that if we have the servers show up and put all in the room, you know, in the server room before we have the chance to get the electricians in order to be able to install the stuff, we're going to have the room full of stuff, and the electricians are going to have to squeeze in and through all of that kind of thing. It would be like building a house and having the electricians show up while you're still pouring cement into the foundation. There's no walls yet. There's no frame up for the house. There's just a cement barrier so that they can pour the cement. The electricians can't do their job yet. So phases are basically what can't happen yet. And so it's conditional on a prior thing happening. Okay? So until those big milestones happen, as they call them, you just have to hold off on making the next things happen. Otherwise, you would presume you would do everything all at once at the same time. So you have to create these sort of phases. Well, noise is basically those hiccups that happen in between project phases, and you really have to give yourself space for some of that noise. So make sure you know what the noise is, what are those lag times, what are the potential lag times, how can you decrease those, and all those kinds of things. Now, a quick tip about this is that I like to actually add a little bit of noise as sort of a buffer into my project plans. That is, if I presume that it's going to take us a week to get all the electrical stuff installed for the servers, well, I'm going to give us a week and a half because it's undoubted that the right Ethernet cable, the Cat5e cable maybe doesn't show up on time, isn't delivered, or whatever it might be, or the electrician is late 2 days and therefore puts us behind schedule, or I'm late 2 days and the electrician had to stand outside my office and wait for me to come into the office to have that installed. So when those types of delays happen, they're natural. It's life. So buffer it in a little bit, and that way you don't get too structured in the idea that things have to happen on such a strict schedule. The noise allows for a little bit of that static not to cause too much stress in your life. Next up are the negatives. The negatives tend to be people who are going to come back at you with negative stuff. This can't be done. The client's not happy with the particular phase outcome. Somebody complains about being ahead or behind schedule. People usually don't complain about being ahead of schedule, but sometimes they do. You're going to get the people who are going to complain from your accountant, or your bookkeeper might say, hey, we're already above budget halfway through this project. What the heck is going on? Deal with those negatives up front. What could happen? how could you go wrong in terms of those things, and work to resolve them. The non-knowables, right? The unknown. I like non-knowables just because it gives us the additional N, so they're the 4 N's, right? But non-knowables are just really unknown criteria for a project. Now, those non-knowables become more knowable after you've repeated a project over and over again over time. But the reality is that non-knowables are not necessarily not knowable. We know that if we understand that these things happen, that is, acts of God happen, you know, there might be a thunderstorm or lightning or those kinds of things. Well, there is insurance for those kinds of things. So, you know, if there is a way in which you can, that's just one example, but there are ways in which you can make sure that you cover yourself for the non-knowables. So if you believe that we're installing the server in a basement, well, basements can flood. Basements can have mold. Basements can have all of these kinds of things. Really flesh out the crazier, sort of extent of things that could happen. Just not to make yourself crazy, but really just to say, okay, if this should happen, if aliens should come down from the sky, tomorrow and beam up our servers, what do we do? Okay, what's the first thing that we should really think about when it comes to those things? And you'd be surprised how helpful that can be in, one, reducing everyone's stress, because it's not likely going to happen. But when it does happen, at least people know the first thing they need to do to move into action, because the worst thing that you can do in project management is just have inaction. Inaction is the death knell of any project, because really a project is about getting to that end, right? It's a temporary endeavor, so we have to get to an end in order for it to be successful. So we really want to make sure about that. Non-responders. Non-responders is that unfortunate nagging problem of sending the email and not getting response. And so it's really important for you to figure out a way to deal with non-responders. That is, they might be clients who are, not quick to respond to you. They might be vendors. They might be staff members. Whatever they might be, when you are not getting responses when you're managing a project, it can be very, very difficult to then know where you are and where you need to tell everyone else to be. So figure out a plan to make sure that everybody's on the same page, and that comes down to having a pretty good tool. And we're going to talk about those momentarily. And finally, adjusts along the way. No project looks the same the day it was set up. Okay? When you write your project plan or you sketch it out on paper for everyone to be able to see, or you write it up as a description, make sure that you understand that you're going to have to adjust it along the way. And I would actually recommend that you have points at every milestone, basically adjusting the plan so that you have, version 2 at milestone 2, version 3 at milestone 3. Not to overcomplicate or create more work for yourself, but so that you understand that once things change, that is, what's happened in this first stage of the game, can we adjust things to make sure that we stay under budget in the second part of the game, and also stay within scope within the third part of the game. Many times when you're working on client projects, it's usually scope creep that you have the problem with. That is, the client says, hey, we see that you built this new piece of wonderful, X, and we'd really like to see more done. We'd like to actually add this piece Y to your project X. Well, that's what's called scope creep. You should get it in writing. But now that that's happened, and hopefully you've made sure that you've gotten paid for that new additional, widget Y, you've also been able to actually tell the rest of your team, okay, there's been scope creep. The plan needs to be adjusted to presume there's going to be scope creep at these next couple of X, Y, and Z, or A, B, and C points. Okay, so you really have to think about that sort of being in a proactive perspective. So you need to be active and proactive as opposed to being reactive all the time, and definitely not inactive, because remember, inaction is really the death knell of the projects. Okay, so I really want to jump into the web tools and talk about some of those now. And of course, if you have any questions about project management, feel free to jump in and ask those questions. I'm happy to answer them. I know it can be a little bit of a daunting and sort of theoretical concept, but it really is helpful for you to learn more about it and to get really comfortable with the idea of managing projects on that fundamental level of understanding them as projects. So there are so many tools out there being used as project management tools and task management tools to be able to help you manage projects. And we're going to talk about the fact that some of these are fluidly and sort of hybrids. They're not classically project management software, but they will do the job basically. And some of them will have more tools than others. But there's some fundamentals that I really want every project management software to have, and we'll talk about those as we move along. All right, so let's head on over into the web browser, and we're going to go over to the first tool. All right, so the first tool, of course, is the great-granddaddy of project management software, which is Microsoft Office. So Microsoft developed this project management tool, and it has so many features under the sun that I can't possibly begin to uncover all of the various minutiae. But just going over the top features, as it has on its website, it does basically project management by helping you stay organized, basically organizing the structure of it. It has all kinds of ways in which you can help plan the project by organizing various pieces or data points and that kind of thing. But as you can see, it Gantt charts, which is a huge tool within the project management profession today. Gantt charting is basically a tool that was created, probably in the, I think, late 1800s, early 1900s. And what it is a geographical representation of resources moving from one to the next throughout the project action plan. Okay, so what that means is, and I can show you an example on one of these sites eventually, but the point is that if you have Sally doing X, you have a visual representation of her doing X before Bob does Y. Okay, and so it shows the sort of on a timeline what needs to happen before other things need to happen, and those can happen concurrently or in a sequential or conditional fashion. Okay, really, really cool stuff. So the Microsoft project, of course, allows you to be able to do all kinds of really cool things. I'm not going to really get into too much of the Microsoft project concept, only because there's a couple of things that the online tool does that the offline tool doesn't. Primarily, this is a downloadable tool, and so the online components to it are and have to be set up in a server environment. So it's limited. You can do it, but since this is project management on the web, I'm telling you about it because it exists, but I'm not necessarily recommending it for purposes of our discussion today. Next up is to say that there is another tool called the Project Libre. Project Libre is the open source alternative to Microsoft Project. So again, this is basically Microsoft Project for free. And so it's open source, meaning that it's a tool that you can download, and the source code for it is freely available. This one happens to be free to download. There's no cost to it, which is a huge benefit to small business. So if you are using downloadable software and you're doing it on your desktop, this is a potential tool that could work very well for you. Again, it does 90% of what you need a replacement of Microsoft Project to do. I know that Microsoft Project probably looks nicer and has a bunch of bells and whistles, but the reality is this handles probably 95 to 98%, I would imagine, of the things that you would need a project management tool to do. Okay, so those are there, and this, of course, has the ability to be downloaded, and then, of course, you have the ability to work on it from a team environment, basically through a network of computers. Okay, so let's move on now from the downloadable software, because that's really not the topic of today's conversation, but I feel like I would be doing you a disservice by not talking about both Project and Project Libre. So those two softwares do exist, and then we'll move on to the the web tools. I see that we have a question. Okay, I'm going to move on. If there's a question, I'm happy to answer it.
Sorry, Ray.
Okay.
It was,
So,
have you ever used Asana as also an online management tool?
yes, and I'm going to be talking about Asana today. So when we get to it, if you have any questions about Asana, feel free to ask. I use it quite thoroughly on a daily basis, so feel free to ask me questions about it, and we'll go through it, and I'll show you a little bit about what the tool has to offer and some of the project management components that it has within the tool. All right, so next up we're going to talk about Deskaway. Deskaway is this online collaboration tool. I like them for a number of different reasons, primarily because it's a very simple or simplified sort of view. So you have this dashboard view which gives you sort of basic and recent activity. It connects to FreshBooks, which is the online invoicing tool. And so if you use that, we actually talked about that in the financial management webinar that we did a couple of months ago. And so you can check that out in the archives as well on the Virginia SBDC Network website. And so the dashboard view gives you this sort of running list, and it's sort of a competitor to Basecamp, which I'm not showing you today only because their website wasn't loading. So Basecamp is a great tool. I just couldn't get the 37 Signals Basecamp website to load. But this is pretty much a comparable solution to it. And so I would take down Basecamp as an option. It's a great tool. The tool was working. The site just wasn't. So I couldn't load it when, at least as of the time of loading up these web browser windows. Anyway, so the site sort of looks like this, and you basically know how many active projects you're working on, and it tells you who your team is, contacts, calendar. You can go ahead and produce reports, and there's this really wonderful start timer and add tasks bar here, so you can sort of add these really quick tasks to the bar. And you can sort of see what's going on, and it's just helpful. You can see the number of projects. You can sort of see it in visual format and otherwise. It's a pretty reasonably priced tool, I think, for up to 20 projects at any given time, which should cover most small businesses. You pay $25 a month, and it works pretty well with being able to sign in with Google Apps. You are able to streamline the email systems because you are primarily working within the project. So instead of having to communicate outside of the system, basically going to your email and typing an email to someone, you can literally just comment on the project, and now that person can respond within the project tool for answering your question or resolving the problem or giving whatever solution to problems that other people might have. So it brings me up to the first sort of criterion of having a good project management tool in the web. It should reduce email, okay? In some way, shape, or form, whatever way in which it decides to do it, it should really reduce the amount of email. Because many times it's in the back and forth email situation where someone doesn't get an email, or people are not receiving their emails, or email gets flooded one day and you lose track of those things. The conversation threads within the project are really, really powerful. Okay, so Deskaway does a good job of being able to thread those conversations, and I think most of the tools that we're going to talk about today do that, and so it's really, really helpful. And this one, of course, connects through Google Apps. So if you happen to have a Google Apps account and you run your business using the Google Apps, all of your staff can basically log in using the Google Apps ID. So really, really helpful if you don't want to have to manage too much more when it comes to security there. Okay, so Deskaway. I'm happy to answer questions about this, but it really helps you handle projects pretty similar to Basecamp. And again, like I said, I would recommend Basecamp as well. Basecamp handles projects in a very, very fluid fashion. And again, for small business, I think it's a really great product. I just couldn't show it today. Next up is Asana. So as the person who asked the question before said, you just basically log into Asana and start working within the tool. So what I wanted to do was just sort of show you around the system a little bit so that we can see what the tool is and some of the deficits that are in the system and what we can do to sort of overcome some of these things when it comes to project management. So like I said before, we're really thinking about sort of the planning, the implementation, and execution, and then of course review of the project on all three portions of it. And so thinking about that sort of project manager role that you're holding a hat over, you have to be able to plan the project, you have to be able to manage it while it's happening, and then you have to be able to review it at its end. And Asana does a pretty good job of being able to help us understand those things. Actually, I'm not even going to log into it. We'll just go into some of the tools that it has for us so that you can sort of see what it looks like. So Asana, from this perspective, you can see here that it has basically a left-hand bar. I know the screen is small on your side, but just bear with me. I don't want to get into the tool. It takes forever to load when you have so many things going on. Once you have it loaded, it's pretty good, and it's probably my own system's lag time, not Asana's fault. It's probably my own. But just understand that it's a little bit slow. Anyway, so on the left-hand side, you have basically what are called workspaces. And so Asana gives you the ability to have your own private workspace for your personal tasks, those kinds of things. But then you can create company-based workspaces. So these workspaces allow you to be able to have these individualized areas where you can have groups of projects. And so you can have a client workspace where you work on projects with a specific client. You can have a broader workspace that is company marketing and management or marketing and operations projects. So you can have these different workspaces, and within those workspaces you have projects, and then within those projects you can manage tasks. Okay, so what Asana is trying to do is to blend together the two parts of planning and execution. Now, I think they do it really well. Some people don't necessarily like the interface. You can see that it's broken up into three parts. The left-hand bar is for the highest hierarchy of, workspaces and projects. The center space is for projects and really looking at the various projects that are happening. And then when you go to the far right, that column is for really the granular details, basically drilling into the tasks under a project and then being able to create subtasks. Okay, so some people need in their world, basically project the tasks associated with that project and then subtasks to those projects, basically 3 layers of management. Okay, I tend to only stick to projects and tasks. I don't try to go beyond to subtasks because most often than not they don't really help me. But for project management professionals, that might be really helpful for them to understand what those subtasks are. I really just need to know who's doing what, when they're doing it, and then of course what it is that they're doing. Okay, and so I don't particularly need that, but they do have subtasks. I feel like the subtasks don't work the same way that the regular tasks do, and so there is some conflict there. But the point is that it's a very competent tool when it comes to handling these kinds of things. Okay, the really, really cool part about Asana is that once you do get into the tool, and I don't want to spend too much more time futzing around because I do want to talk about a couple of other things, is that it has all of these amazing integrations. So Asana connects with Google Drive and Dropbox so that you can just manage file storage directly from it. So you literally go into the tool and you can just say, oh, attach this Google Drive document to this task so that so-and-so has it available to them or you have it available to them. And you can actually ask questions about that Google Drive document, and now all of that information is basically kept within the same perspective. And it looks like they've actually added Box. Maybe they've had it a while and I just didn't notice it, but they also have a Box integration, which is very similar to Dropbox. Insta-Gantt, basically Asana doesn't come with a built-in Gantt chart, and I told you earlier I would show you a little example. This is a little example, I guess, and here you can see they have all of the various tasks that are associated with this project, and then they have the timeline with the resources that are available to them, and this one's color-coded. So you can actually have symbols and color codes associated with Gantt charts, and here you can see that this is in a timeline which shows all the dependencies, in a really cool format. Zapier is an automation tool, and it allows you to be able to say, if this happens, then I want you to do X. In sometimes another tool. So you might say, if I change this tag in Asana allows you to be able to tag things, just basically adding additional context. So you can basically create a tag that's high priority, and you could just tag those things that are only high priority with it, and now sort the list to see those. Those only happen within workspaces. They don't work inter-workspace, so be careful about that. But in Zapier, you could say, if I tag something high priority, then I want you to add it to my calendar. And so it will push a new calendar item to Google Calendar for you. Really, really powerful tool. It works with dozens, if not hundreds, of different other tools. So really check out Zapier and the connections it has to Asana. It's really, really powerful. Next up is the idea of being able to turn tasks from email into Asana tasks. Okay, so say you get an email from one of your staff members, or you want to send an email to somebody. Well, you can actually just send an email to x@mail.asana.com, and you have different ways in which you can manipulate the email. You can learn more about it from Asana's website help area, but it allows you to then turn that email into a task in Asana. So it'll take all of the notes and attachments you have and the people who are copied on the email even, and they become basically, collaborators within that particular task based on the email. So the fact that you can take an email and turn it from email, which can be a silent data silo or a closed data silo, into a productive workspace is really, really powerful. Okay? So I really like that for that purpose. Next up, there's a couple of other tools that I really like in here. Fancy Hands, which is a personal assistant service. You can basically assign tasks directly to Fancy Hands. So if you need a personal assistant, a virtual assistant, and you haven't gotten one yet, they are a very reasonably priced service that does it by request. So you actually use them as a request-based service. There's integration with MailChimp and Evernote and WordPress, so that you can have the Asana dashboard within WordPress, which can be really, really helpful. And so many other integrations. As you can see, I'm just scrolling down here so that you can see Google Calendar Sync, so that you can see all your projects in time format as well. Okay, so Asana is amazing. Next up is a tool called Smartsheet. Smartsheet is basically very similar to the other ones, except that it's very much in a spreadsheet style. So if you like spreadsheets and sort of like the look and feel of that, it works in that same capacity. Also has Google Apps integration, so you can log in and sign up via Google Apps, so you can manage the business that way. And what I really love about Smartsheet is, because I love Gantt charts, when I'm project planning, I love to see that visual chart. I love to see the Gantt chart, and they create that timeline for you automatically because you're using the spreadsheet. So the spreadsheet knows how to, on the fly, manifest itself, and also it adjusts as soon as you change something. So if you change a particular criteria or a dependency or a date or something like that, it automatically adjusts. So Smartsheet is really, really amazing for that. So smartsheet.com. I'm going to skip that one. Liquid Planner is very, very similar to Asana in the sense that it helps you sort of go back and forth between the project perspective and the implementation or execution perspective. Not many of these tools have a quote-unquote review perspective, but you should really always do a debriefing when you're project managing. And so I usually like to create a phase of the project that's basically a review phase, so that ending every project, there's opportunity for celebration and there's opportunity for reviewing, so that you can learn what has worked and what hasn't. So Liquid Planner is a great tool. It works really well for project managers, and I've seen it work well for marketing professionals. So good to keep that in mind as well. Flow is a fairly new product, and let me go back to its main screen. So Flow is a tool really developed so that you can work away from being dependent upon email. Okay, so being able to visually represent the tool, cutting down on email, and of course being able to collaborate integratively with your other tools are really the primary functions that I like any project management tool to work on. So in this case, Flow happens to have all of those. It helps you to be able to work really well within the framework of managing the project. The interface that I can show you here is very, very simple. It's very clean. You just add things into the system. It's a very clean interface, and you just have conversations within the perspective of the items. You know, as you can see, it's very white space oriented. It's a very nice design. I like it. It's a clean tool, and I would recommend Flow as well. It's at getflow.com. Okay, so I've gone over some of the tools just for you to be able to know what's out there and to sort of check them out. I also wanted to talk about some of the tips to sort of close out the webinar, and then we'd have time for question and answers. And so, you know, as I talked about, you know, Basecamp and Flow and Asana and so on and so forth, all of these tools, Liquid Planner, they're all basically pretty competent to get what you need done. None of them are going to fail you. It's really the human component that is going to be really important about that, and I'll talk about that in a moment. First, the big tips about these things is communication is so key to success here. You really need to think about how you're going to communicate with people and how the tools you have at hand are going to be utilized. So, for example, you might think, this is so great, I can cut down on email and use Asana or use Basecamp now to communicate all of my stuff that I want to communicate with my staff. Wrong. No. You should only be using that tool to communicate project management stuff. So project communications happen within the project management tool, but it does not get rid of email or phone calls. Secondarily, most often than not, while it's really important to track outcomes of conversations and those kinds of things, many times people use the wrong communications medium for communicating in certain contexts. So, for example, if I need to give critical feedback to a member of my team, I'm likely not to do that in a public forum like Asana inside of a task in writing. That's a pick up the phone or a face-to-face, you know, Skype call for me, since we're virtual, or literally meeting them if it's that critical. But many times we shirk face-to-face and more personable communication, especially when it comes to critical constructive feedback. And when it comes to project management, being able to do that effectively is part of being a project manager, and you have to do it well. So if you can't communicate that properly, no project management tool, software on the web is going to help you have a positive outcome when it comes to a project. So learn what the appropriate mechanisms for being able to communicate those things. That is, if you do come to an appropriate outcome in communicating something, feedback, or whatever it might be, it just might be answering a question, make sure that you then track that in the project management tool. So build a habit of going back to the project management tool and capturing what it is that needed to be done, or whatever the outcome was of that particular conversation was. So knowing the appropriate mechanism for medium for being able to communicate is important, but also then knowing how to basically go back and consistently capture sort of what a project management friend of mine consistently talks about. She talks about anchoring the flag, putting a flag in the sand, basically. And you need to do that. You need to plant the flag so that you know where it is that you left off from that communication. So really, communication is so key there. 2 is the tool is only as good as the people involved. And so if you have a weakest link, or if you are not developing your people in a way that's going to help them consistently produce great project outcomes, the tool can't help there. So really think about, and the tool can actually cover up big problems, because people can lie, people can do all kinds of foolish things by covering it up through the tool. So make sure that your people involved are solid so that the tool can do well by you and the business. Remember that good in, good out, and bad in, bad out. It's an old computer programming I'm paraphrasing it because it's a little bit vulgar, but the the point is that the point is that you put good information in, you're going to get good information out. But if you put bad in, you're going to put bad out. That's the same with HR. So if you have good people working and paying attention, and I'm not talking about people being bad. I'm talking about them not being effectively prepared for being able to handle those projects. So you really have to make sure that they have the skills and that you're supporting them from a management perspective. That is, if they need support, give them that support because that's going to help you in the long run. And then finally, manage client projects and internal marketing and operations the same. I know that can sound really difficult to do, but you should never basically basically put a client project or an internal operations project above or below one another. They're all projects, and yes, some might have time-bound requirements. All of them will, because they're projects, right? We learned that today. But the reality is that you shouldn't say, oh, well, we won't start this particular project because we should only be working on client projects. At some point, if you subvert all of your internal marketing and operations projects for external projects, yes, you'll be doing and making money, presumably, because the projects will hopefully be within scope, up to quality, on time and under budget. But the reality is that you need to make sure that you're doing as much for the business as you are for your clients. And so if you don't keep the house in order, you don't keep it clean, things are going to start to decay internally. So make marketing projects. Make sure that there are projects in the system, and make sure that your entire staff is working just as diligently to get to project outcomes on those as they are on the client projects. So if you create them as internal projects, now you have this paradigm where basically you're your own client, and you get to work on those as best and effectively for yourself as for the clients that you're working on out there, because both really need to be handled. So at this point, I'm happy to take questions, go over some of the specific tools that we did go through, and answer any specific questions about those, and then we can wrap up. So I'll hand it over to you, Tracy.
Great, thanks, Ray. We do have a couple of questions. One is, what are the criteria for selecting an online project management tool? You mentioned one is reducing email via conversation threads, but are there more on your criteria list?
Yes. So the three that I mentioned, and I apologize if I didn't mention them explicitly enough, but they have to reduce email. Basically, so they have to pull project conversations back into the projects and create those conversation threads. Two, they have to be able to integrate with other tools. They just can't sit inside of a data silo. So one of the things that I really like, and that's why I spent a little bit of time walking around Asana, was that I really like the fact that it integrates with all these other tools that you would be using, so that you're not limited to just the feature set within that particular tool. And then three, it has to be able to give you the framework or the structure to be able to plan, that is, create a project plan within it, however that is done, and then be able to track the tasks and conversations associated with it, and then give you some kind of review functionality. So I want it to be able to go back and see what happened, give me reports, give me some kind of data backflow, so that I can do the analysis and synthesis that's necessary for me to be able to make better decisions going forward from that point. So I really like those items. Some optional features that I particularly like is having a cross-platform, so that it works both on, I don't know if you're Windows or Mac out there, but whether you want to make sure that they work on the web, in the web browsers that you're using. So if you're primarily Safari House on Mac, well, then make sure that the tool actually works really well within Safari. But if you're a Windows house and you have the option of many different browsers, then you can, of course, make sure that they just work in your browser of choice. And then, of course, having mobile applications, whether that be on iOS, Android, or the Windows mobile operating systems, making sure that they work maybe on the Surface if you have the Surface. But making sure they work on your tools is going to be equally as important as well.
Great. Are there any online project management tools that integrate with SharePoint?
Oh, there are dozens and dozens. So if you are using SharePoint, I would probably look at some of the larger project management tools. Look at Microsoft Office Online and how Microsoft Project works, the server platform, and Basecamp. I think also has some kind of integration, but I'm not sure about that one. And then of course just do a Google search, and you'll find several of them that actually will connect to SharePoint and work with them. Those are much more enterprise level software, so it's going to cost a little bit more money, and so that's a little bit beyond the scope of today's discussion, but they do exist. They are out there.
Okay. We have one that's a little bit different. Can you recommend a free or low-cost event registration program?
So, well, there are many out there. I mean, it depends on what you're really looking for. The ones that just come to mind out the gate are Eventbrite, Ticket Leap, Brown Paper Tickets, and then of course if you're attempting to create a mobile app for the event, there's EventMobi, and I know they have some event registration sort of built-in functionality there. So I would try all of those and see how they work for you.
Great. Well, thanks, Ray. We've reached the top of the hour. Thanks, everyone, for participating today. Today's webinar was recorded and will be posted on the Virginia SBDC website under Libre Webinars and Recordings. Tomorrow, you'll be receiving a follow-up email on this webinar, and there'll be an evaluation link in the email. Please help us to continue to improve our training by taking the time to complete the evaluation. If you want to complete it now, I have put that in your chat window, and you can go ahead and complete that. Again, thank you, everyone, for participating in today's webinar.